Hello everyone, it's Mr. Barden here. Thanks all for coming. Today we're just going to hop right into it, but if you haven't already gone there, I've got two URLs on the wall, one of which takes you to the sketch for today, the other takes you to the online textbook for the course. As I mentioned before I started rolling, the goal for today is to be able to play back multiple sound files using P5.js, the coding editor and library, and the Tone.js audio library. So the reason I've given you a link to the textbook is because if you go to additional resources and find the little tab here called samples for projects, there are a whole bunch of projects that you can use for, well, really just about anything. Anything related to this class. For other stuff, they're free to use without worrying about copyright stuff. So if you don't already have some sound files you wanted to use for this, you can just click and download and find some ones that'll be useful for today. All right, so while you're doing that, I've got a link to here, and actually I don't think I need this, but a link to right here. This right here that I keep mentioning is the sketch. So this will be a great place for everyone to start. You don't necessarily have to, but I've already done one step for you, and that is getting the Tone library loaded up into the sketch's HTML file. I'm not going to break down what I did and how I got this to do its thing. It's relatively straightforward, but that's not what we're going to be focusing on today. So that's why I decided to give you the starting bits. So what do we have to do? Well, let's break it down. We have to get our files into the sketch. That way our sketch can actually see and do stuff with it. We have to then tell the sketch what to do with those and make sure everything is, I say wired up, metaphorically connected in the code, so that way we can hear all of the sketch, all the stuff in our sketch. And that's what we're going to do. So if you look right over here in the sketch where I hovered over and hopped into that HTML file, this is like a file browser here. It's pretty, bare bones, don't expect a whole lot with this, but it's used for getting files into our sketches. So if you look where it says sketch files and this little downward pointing triangle and click on it, we have the option to do a few things. I'm going to make a folder. I like making folders to organize all my stuff, but you don't necessarily have to. I'm going to make a folder. I'm then going to click on the folder and then the little triangle next to it to upload some files. And I'm just going to drag and drop two files that I downloaded from that web page the other day and stick those right there. So you'll see that a little animation plays, and then they'll pop up right over here on the left. So that's how you'll know that they're there. If you wanted to rename your files, you just have to click on the file, the little triangle next to it, and hit rename. I'm not going to do that for today. So we don't need that anymore. Let's head back into the sketch. So I've already made a global variable right here. This is what's going to be used to store all of our sounds. So again, I'm just calling it soundtrack. If you're not starting with the starting code, you can name it essentially whatever you want. But I figured soundtrack was, pretty straightforward. So what I'm also going to do is pull up function preload right there. So preload, if you're unaware, is a function that will load up any of these extra files and get them ready to be utilized by your sketch before the sketch even starts running. This is very useful just to make sure everything is ready to go so you don't run into an issue of trying to access some file that hasn't properly been loaded into the set yet. So doing it like this, it may make your sketches take just a hair longer to load up, but really that's better in the long run for that. So let's go in. So I'm going to talk to this soundtrack here, SOUND soundtrack, and it's going to become a new Tone.players object. So what this is, Tone.players is one of the two objects in P5 that can be used to play back audio files. The other one is called Tone.player, singular. The The only real difference is that players with an S, like I've typed right here, is multiple of the singular player objects all wrapped up into one larger entity. So this is very useful if you have multiple sound files and want to just, bundle them up and tell it which one to play at one time. You don't have to make 30 different objects to play back 30 different sounds. You could just make one. In order to make this work, we need to hop into the parentheses right here. We'll open up our curly brackets and open that up. So this is going to use JSON formatting in order to load in the sounds. We have to give it a name and tell the computer where to find these sound files. So we're going to do just that. I have one called fx_3, so we're just going to call it fx, and then colon, and then as a string, we're going to tell it where to find the file. So this will actually be audio /fx_3.mp3. So because I put my files locally here in the sketch, but they're in a folder, we have to talk to the folder and then look in the folder and find the file name and extension. I'll use this point just to mention two quick things. One is that your files don't have to be MP3 files. They can be just about any kind of audio file in order for this to work. However, when we are loading the audio files into P5 like we're doing right now, we are limited on our space. If we went and just opened up my assets here in a new tab, you can see that this is everything that I have loaded into my P5 account. Every account gets 250 megabytes of storage space for their assets. That's not a ton. So having smaller audio files that are more compressed, like a MP3 file, or linking to a file hosted somewhere else online are great ways to make sure that you don't run out of space before you think you will. In order to do this online, as I mentioned, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but basically you just have to have the file hosted somewhere, and instead of telling it where to locally find the file, you would put it into the URL. That's very handy, but if you're not the one managing it and someone else updates something or changes something and it breaks that URL, it kind of got a bit of a problem until you realize that and fix it. So I personally like to manage all my stuff myself, but that's just me. Okay, so from here, all we have to do is for every sound file we want to add, we just follow the same idea. So I'll call this one bass because it's a bass being hit, and then we'll say we find it in audio /bass plus hit 01.mp3. There we go. And you just do this for as many sound files as you want. There's other ways you can add them in while the sketch is running, but for right now, you can just load them up right here and have them ready to go. So this is the first part. Again, if we run this, we shouldn't see any errors. So everything is there. The computer is happy. We're not quite there yet. All right, we can't play these files. And if we did, we wouldn't be able to hear them. So I'm going to do one bit right now because it's very simple. We're not going to worry about any processing of these audio files. We just want to hear them back in their raw state. So right after this closing parenthesis, but before the semicolon, I'm going to add a method that we're going to do. And we're just going to say dot to destination. Now what this will do is this will essentially, be the same as taking a cable and plugging in, one side into the output of the audio player and then another one into the input of our speakers. We're saying send this audio to the destination speakers, which just happens to be whatever the computer is set to. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but you get the idea. If you don't have to destination in your signal pathway, you will not hear anything. So that's important to have. The last little bit is we just have to tell our sketch that we need to play this audio. So we're just going to scroll through here, and you'll notice I've also pulled up in the starting code function keyPressed. Now, function keyPressed is very handy, especially when we're playing audio samples, because when we press any key, P5 will run function keyPressed one time. That's it. The reason this is different than saying, if key is pressed in the draw loop is because at that point it's going to check every single frame, and if I press a key, I'm very unlikely to press a key for less than a 60th of a second, because this is running at 60 frames a second, and then it'll try to start the file multiple times. We kind of get this kind of sound. It's very, very jarring, very problematic, and it's going to happen every single time you play your audio, which, since our goal is to just play back the raw file, that's, like I said, a bit of a problem. So you're going to want to do this in function keyPressed, like I'm about to show you. Let's just move that up a little bit. I don't want it to be too low on the screen for the people in the back. So in order to do this, we just have to say, okay, what do we want the trigger for these sounds to be? For today, we're going to use the keyboard, but it could be, on-screen buttons, other kinds of inputs. It can be essentially whatever you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a simple conditional statement. So we'll just say if key code is equal to, I should have written some down beforehand. I'm just going to put 32 here, but we're going to add this. So I can say, let's play Q is 81, and W is 87. Else if key code is equal to 87. There we go. Q and W. And I'll just do this. Q, W. Alright. So what I'm going to be doing is making it so when I press one button, one file plays. When I press another, the other file plays. That's the goal of this. Essentially, we will be creating a virtual version of an audio sampler or playback. Something like my conveniently placed prop. This, where we can set it up to where, a drum pad, each one plays a different pad. This is very useful because, well, one, you don't have to buy potentially hundreds of or thousands of dollars worth of equipment. You can just program it for free. So very handy if you're doing things like podcasts or videos and okay, we want to play some sound files. You can just hit a button on your keyboard and it plays the thing. It's very, very handy, but it also shows that we can set these triggers to be whatever we want. So while your sketch or your game is running, we can just set up an individual trigger. So maybe when sprite A and sprite B collide, a bonk sound gets played, or whenever your health reaches 0, the game over music plays. Stuff like that is kind of the goal of this little exercise. So we've got our triggers. Let me just tidy that up here. So now we have to tell it what to play. So this is actually pretty simple, but with some recent updates, it's just a little bit more convoluted. Well, I don't want to say convoluted. The naming has changed, and depending on what you name your stuff, it can get a little repetitive to type. But we have to talk to our object, soundtrack.player. So in the player, our method right here, we have to tell it which player to look at. So if you remember, each of these is a individual player without the S, all wrapped up into players with the S. So we have to tell it which one specifically to play. So that'll be, as a string, fx. And then we just chain another method onto that, and we'll say dot start. Just like so. And then down here we would say soundtrack.player start. And we would tell this one it would be bass. And that's really it, because we've already connected the players object to the destination speakers, and then this is just the command to, hey, look at this sound file and play it back, start it from the beginning. So if I refresh this, we should, once I click onto the canvas, see that when I click the Q button, that the sound, sound 1, the FX sound plays, and when I press the W button, the bass hit sound plays. So let's see if it works, or if I'm about to be embarrassed. Alright, it works. Let me turn that up. It's the first one. That might be a hair loud now. Alright, so that's just me hitting Q over and over again. Let's hit W. We get the idea. I'm not going to sit here blasting those two sounds over and over again, but you all in your headphones should be, if you've been following along, loaded up some sounds, you should be able to hear some. Has anyone not been able to get that? Awesome. So this is basically it. We can load up as many sounds as we have room to load up, give them unique triggers, but it's also, like I mentioned, important to make sure that we have this to destination. If I didn't have that, I just get rid of it and refresh my sketch. Then, if I press Q, we're not hearing anything. If I press W, we're not hearing anything. But we're not getting any errors because everything's behaving as it should be. You just haven't plugged in your playback device into the speaker, metaphorically speaking. So we just have to say dot to destination. And if you know how to implement audio effects, this is where you would begin to say, okay, we'll chain them up and build all the stuff, and eventually you can have all of your various processing. That's not what we're going to talk about today. That's a whole other topic. Don't worry, we'll get to it though. And then also in a future lesson, I'll show you how you can actually record this playback. So again, you could set up things. So maybe I wanted to make a beat. Again, we're making a virtual drum machine. Again, you can, pad it out, make a beat, record whatever playbacks you're playing, and save that as a file. The Tone library is very useful for playing back and manipulating various kinds of files. So with that being said, I have now reached the end of my planned lesson. So if anyone have any questions about anything I've talked about? Really? All right, I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth, but if anything does pop up, definitely reach out to me. And I want to thank everyone for coming. Have a great day, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye. And now I have to awkwardly go over here and stop the camera.